let me say that he's my former advisor at the time of my PhD. Then I'm really proud of you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul.
Okay, then it's enough, I think. For
yeah, and thank you for your invitation to contribute to this workshop. The topic of this workshop is not my usual area of work, so all what I'm be trying to do is to share with you my thought and a prioris about what I consider to be the safe grounds and the risky shores about talking about robotics. So the purpose of the workshop is how roboticists describe and explain their field, the problems of language that we have been talking about, understanding and perception of robotics, and how robotics is perceived by our contemporaries, and what we can do, we as roboticists, in order to make this perception as clear and as close as possible to the reality. So the discourse about robotics is, of course, part of it is among roboticists in the technical literature. And for that, we can use a broad range of words. Yeah, a broad range of words. We can use labels and notations that may appear strange to the lay person who is not familiar with the field, but that refer to precise content and scientific models. For example, when you read the flavor of a wave or the charm of a particle, no one is disturbed with these labels. No one is expecting to mix this flavor with vanilla or whatever. This is something very clear. In physics, you have a lot of examples. Less clear is in philosophy. This is intentional, not in the sense that you used it. It's intentional with an S, not with a T. And it refers to something very technical in the philosophy of mind. It refers to the external reference of a mindset. Here again, you have to be aware of what it is and to read the technical literature, because intentional refer to many things that we may not necessarily grasp. And this is even more dangerous, and I'll say more about that. So this is in the use of labels and notations within the field, and then toward users and the general audience, and the main problems is the mixture between the two. So explaining robotics to the general audience, there is the usual concern of scientists to explain their field. And there is also the concern that we are dealing with fast technology developments that are getting faster and faster, while the social evolution is quite slow. Social evolution has not speed up where technology development has developed. And when we talk about disruption, it means that we don't have much time for social adaptation. And social adaptation is very important because technology is being deployed without some feedback loop to allow us as a society to control it. So in my view, there is an urgency to reach a good social understanding of the technology. Because of that, we have to be very cautious about our terms and to perform action beyond outreach actions, to integrate these concerns in our design and in our research agenda. So this was my introduction. For the rest of the talk, I'll briefly speak about what I consider the safe grounds for describing robotics and what I consider to be the hazardous shores of this robotic species. So robotics, this is the loop that we have been working on for almost 40 years, the loop between perception, decision, and action. And this loop has some precise meanings, and the safe grounds of these loops are mostly machines, mechanics and control, and computational science and engineering. So this is our field, this is the safe grounds, and for me, I feel comfortable when I speak about this loop in these terms. I'm not going to discuss this point. I believe Jean-Paul covered most of it. Machine, mechanics, and control, that's our route. I'm going to say a little bit more about computational science and engineering, because the issue is not just AI. AI is just one component, a set of techniques, but it's not just AI. It's a whole set of techniques on which this loop is grounded. So I skip this. I believe that we have covered some of that in the previous discussion with Jean-Paul's presentation. Let me say a few things about computational science and engineering. For me, computational science and engineering is the convergence of three things. One is computational models, simulation, and computing. The second thing is sensing, imaging, and communication, in particular devices and signal processing. And the third thing is algorithms, massive data processing, and learning in the sense of machine learning, the narrow, precise sense of machine learning. And these three things allow some converging integration capabilities that I would like to clarify and that are very efficient for the kind of machines that we try to design. So modeling, simulation, and computation, the field has benefited from a huge scaling up in terms of capacity of our machine. Everyone is familiar with that, but the figures are always amazing because no technology has evolved as fast as that. The field also, because of this, is able to perform integration over heterogeneous model. This is quite new, and in my view, it's more important than the scaling up. What does this mean? It means that complex problems involve interactions of several phenomena. They cannot be grasped from a single view. One has to combine different views, and each phenomena has to be addressed not in isolation, but coupled. And this coupling is a huge problem because you have to integrate heterogeneous mathematical formalism, differential models, geometric models, deterministic, stochastic, combinatorial, into algorithmic and software components. And you have to compose components, different models that have different components that have different components to build up increasingly more complex and encompassing models that will drive your complex machines. This is really a challenge, and we are progressing on these integration capabilities. It's not integration in the engineering sense, it is integration in the sense of modeling. And the third point is the universal scope of these capabilities. Universal in what sense? Galileo wrote that the book of universe is written in mathematics. But we all know that this was not true for a lot of sciences that had no use of mathematics. And Michel Serres correctly said that Galileo's vision applied to an exception, mostly physics, astronomy, and some engineering disciplines. This exception does not hold anymore. But the Galileo model has changed. Nature is written in algorithmic language. We have extended, because of this, it's still part of mathematics, but it has some efficiency regarding its scope. So this is very briefly the first point of computational science and engineering route on which we should ground our speeches about robotics. The second one is sensing, imaging, communication. Of course, we have a huge scaling up, integration, scope. Because of the previous point, we have low-cost, massive production of sensors that have transformed entirely our life. The early robotics work could do almost nothing as compared to what we can do today. When I was a student, an inertial system like that costed millions. Really millions. It was something out of reach, whereas today it's a matter of maybe $100. A laser system costed tens of thousands of dollars. It has been integrated in LiDARs, and the last version of it is just one chip, integrating both the emitter and the receiver, and so on. All kinds of sensors, cameras, sonars, depth field, etc. This has changed the life of roboticists in order to interact and perform tasks more effectively. In addition to the low cost, we have extended signal processing and sensor fusion techniques. I could talk about that for a while, but let me go on quickly. We can do distributed, mobile, and widely flexible sensors that enrich the view of a machine, and we have communicating sensors, which is something really new up to now in technology. All our devices were for the communication of a person only. Now our devices communicate between themselves, and we can create, we can add to this capability, the integration of data from sensors, from computation, from a broad range of phenomena over wide space and extended time because of the fusion capacities and over masses of prosumers that are not only all of us over by designing models and sharing them that allow a student here to use the model of some other researcher at the other part of the planet, but also robots are now allowed in a way to post models and to share models. And finally, there is the issue of algorithms, massive data processing and learning, where we have developed interpretation capabilities, automated search, mining, machine learning techniques. This, no time to develop each one of them, but these three main engines of computational science and engineering, computational models, sensing and imaging, algorithms, and massive data are providing our robots with more capabilities as machines that integrate a wide set of devices and benefit increasingly from different resources, computational models at every level, simulation at the design stage, in feed-forward and predictive control, in various forms of planning, different kind of proprioceptive and exteroceptive sensors that are becoming very cheap, very efficient data processing, in data association, in interpretation, in recognition, decision-making, in planning, in perception, in dialogue. Taking a decision is just making a choice between different options in some alternatives. No mental state here is met. And extended communication for the interaction with humans and with other robots, and model sharing. All these make our robot as programmable integrated set of devices to perform tasks. This is mostly to perform tasks, and this is to perform a broader diversity of tasks. The main point here for me is that we are trying to not to have more and more specialized machine, each one in a narrow technical niche, but machines that are more versatile in terms of the diversity of tasks and the diversity of environment they can cope with. And this required necessarily some decision capabilities in the narrow sense that I just underlined, and some adaptation capabilities. And these decision-making capabilities and adaptation capabilities can be either internal means to the machine or distributed means on which the machine can draw and can connect to and get what is needed in order to be able to adapt. So this is, in my view, and sorry for having no time to develop all the techniques or give you a hint or intuition about all the techniques behind this, but this is, in my view, the safe grounds about which we should be describing our robotics. We should stick to this ground, and in my view, I always am more comfortable to stick to these grounds of machine and automation and control and computational science and engineering. Let me speak about the hazardous shores of robotics descriptions, and these are metaphors and anthropomorphism. So, metaphors. A metaphor is not an analogy. An analogy, for me, is a rational argument on similarities and distinctions between two different things. And while a metaphor is a figure of speech suggesting a direct comparison without the rational framework of analogy. So I'm at ease with analogy, less at ease with metaphors, although I recognize that it can be useful in teaching, in designing, in conceiving, and so on. So a metaphor is understanding, experiencing one thing in terms of the other. In poetry, metaphors are wonderful images. We all enjoy the metaphor in poetry. I'm not going to translate, but you can guess that a tempest has not blessed in any literal sense. There is no blessing here and of the tempest. And we enjoy that. And if I stay at the marine images, here is another set of, another poem by Ruskin. They rode her a ship, hurled her across the rolling foam, the cruel crawling foam. Of course, the foam was not cruel. It was the way the rowers perceived it as cruel, and no one is misled. Oh, everyone understands that the tempest is not blessing and the form is cruel. Everyone understands that, and we are very happy with that. By the way, I like the title of this essay by Ruskin, The Pathetic Fallacy. It's very, very interesting. But as long as there is a feeling of the poet and the reader, everything is fine. This is, he defines it as attributing, John Ruskin defines it as attributing human emotion and context to natural processes described as if they were from intentions. Here with a T, by the way. Whereas there is no intention in the tempest and no intention in the form. So this is metaphors in poetry, and we all enjoy that as much as we can. Metaphor in politics. This is a completely different story. These are, in my view, manipulative means. Here is a recent study about how we react to crime when it is described as a beast and when it is described as a virus. Most people react to crime when it is described as a beast, when calling for strong law enforcement actions. When it is described as a virus, the public is more open to all kinds of measures, to understanding of the causes and what socially can be done. No surprise to most of us. The surprise is participants are completely unaware about the metaphorical context that affected their reasoning. They say that no, this kind of crime should really be punished, whereas this kind of crime whereas the same crime has been presented to part of the audience differently. So the authors of this study say that far from being mere rhetorical flourishes, metaphors have profound influences of how we conceptualize and act with respect to important societal issues, and of course technical one as well. I believe that every politician, every lawyer master this kind of manipulation means, and this kind of tricks. But as a scientist, this is not what we want. Metaphors in science are used as a pedagogical means to clarify, sometimes as a way to share our wonder for the world. So let me say a few usually used metaphors in science. Nature abhors vacuum. Of course, nature does not abhor anything. Our air hates to be crowded. Here we are referring to pressures and things that are very usual, and we teach that to our students because this is something that enables them to remember some of the pressure laws, or we say that the elegant universe. Because we have a joy to look at the sky and we find some elegance. The universe is just neutral. It's no more elegant than, or the cosmos as a string symphony. This is more subtle because you have some theory of describing the cosmos with particular physics, string theory, and you refer to music and string music and say the cosmos is a string symphony. These are nice metaphors. The astrophysicist Schaff said that I like my black holes fearsome and my interstellar gas thin and frail. Well, very good, but no one is expecting courage or fear from a black hole. These are something neutral. Now, this is less neutral. You probably are familiar with this famous book by Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, that goes beyond the view of the selfish individuals or species of Darwin and explained one step further the Darwinian evolution. I like very much this work, but still this is misleading. And I believe that even Dawkins has recognized in a way that it is misleading. Many biologists have criticized this. The idea that genes are selfish is unnecessary for understanding how they work, and in some way misleading, and may drive people away from evolution theory. But still, as the title of the book, but you have to dig to understand what's in there, is fine. Now, I was in a meeting a few days ago with a biologist, and we discussed, you were as well, and we discussed this CRISPR. And he expressed a strong dissatisfaction about this kind of metaphors. Gene editing, scissors, targeting. You just do cut and paste. That's not true. That's simply not true. It's not the case. What you are requiring is an accurate description of how this technology works and how it can be used. What is known and unknown about its potential consequences? What are the ethical complexity of the technology? When you just use these metaphors, you get away of all this. Another paper on this said that the current predominant metaphors about CRISPR miss all of this. So be aware of our metaphors. Few citations about the dangers of metaphors and proper use of metaphors widen rather than closes the gap between scientific realities and the expectation of the public. Misleading metaphors have the power to manipulate, to shut down thinking, to deflect creativity. This is even more dangerous. And the last one refers to a quotation by Rosenbluth and Weiner. At the very least, metaphors should be admitted into science only after strict examination. We ought to heed the warning of cybernetists Rosenbluth and Weiner that the price of metaphor is eternal vigilance. I believe we should really say that to every roboticist that is using metaphors. So, metaphors in robotics. We heard a few today. The tile robot, the thinking robot, the dancing robot, the dancing robot. Are they dancing? Are they dancing? In my view, dancing is a complex resonance between the whole body with perceived rhythm and music, which involves some form of emotion. When I'm attending a jazz concert, I start beating the swing before I'm aware of it. There is nothing here of that. It's just a scripting of a nice scripting of motion that are apparently pleasant to the audience, but it's a stage performance. And like every stage performance, it is faked. As a stage performance, I'm fine with it, but as a reality, it's a stage performance as faked as this one. It's a stage performance, and in some good stage performance, we are warned that it is faked, that it is an illusion. So, the feeling robot. This is even more, in my view, more risky. There are dozens of papers about emotion in robots. I'm not talking about robot perceiving emotions in someone. I'm talking about emotion felt by a robot. There are dozens of papers. Here is a recent survey that you can find of the web. When you go through this, the papers surveyed here, you find that most often this boils down to some heuristic parameter into a search or navigation or planning algorithm. You have a second order heuristic parameter and you call it emotion. And you try to understand no emotion in the sense that I understanding. And emotion is a response to some external or internal event that involves complex physiological responses that have wide effects on the body. Heartbeat, breathing, sweating, muscle, tensions, metabolism, all the proteome and the metabolome are involved in emotions with some degree of pleasure and displeasure. Nothing in our machines. Nothing of that sort. We should be clear about that for the public. So basically, when I see emotion as metaphoric names of parameters, I remember a paper that was written some 41 years ago by Drew McDermott, and the title is very interesting, Artificial Intelligence Meets Natural Stupidity. If you are not familiar with this paper, I urge you to read it. It's available over the web. He says that if your researcher sculls his program, understand he is merely begging the question because he is trying himself to explore what some specific understanding does. The program does not understand anything. And then he's misleading a lot of people, prominently himself. And then you find out some software, some interpreter, this is the old interpreter, that includes a story understanding model. And then there is an ego loop. Why should we put a loop there called ego? Where is the ego of this loop? So, unfortunately, this paper by Drew McDermott has been forgotten, and you see a lot of things about desires, beliefs, intentions that are not grounded in the reality of mental states of these worlds. So you say, let's be serious. Nothing here is serious. There is something that can be serious and that needs to be discussed, which is computationalism. Computationalism relies on the assumptions that if two systems are functionally indistinguishable, they are mentally undistinguishable. This is the assumption. This goes beyond behaviorism. So this view is a dominant, not sure, fully dominant view of the philosophy of the mind today. It's a popular view, let's say, of the philosophy of the mind. It asserts that all mental states are computational states, including how it feels to be in that particular mental state. If my mental states are simulated by a machine, this machine will not only behave exactly like me, but also feel and think exactly like me. So this is this view, and because of that, you reach the conclusion that consciousness is computable. So we have to be very careful about that and to analyze this assumption. There are very convincing arguments, very good proof, even formal one, that all computable functions in the Turing sense and Church sense are substrate independent. What does it mean? They can be computed with mechanically, with electronics, with waves, with photons. They can be computed in any different forms. They are computable by any form of substrate. So, but these are only computable functions. How about emotions? These are our intentions. I'm not aware of a single argument that says that these are computable functions in the precise sense that I referred to. I haven't seen any argument that demonstrates that they are substrate independent. So if we adhere to computationalism, let's keep in mind its assumptions. And the last point is anthropomorphism. And anthropomorphism, in the sense of human anthropomorphizing, is the tendency to attribute human characteristics to a non-human entity with no reference to its real competences. What makes us see others as mind rather than bodies says what? And the degree of how much I can anthropomorphize depends on the physical similarities with an entity and the degree of fondness for it. Of course, physical similarity augments anthropomorphism, but fondness as well. When my granddaughter is engaged with long arguments with her doll, there is no confusion in her mind that this is just a doll, that this doll has no feeling whatsoever, and the nature of the game she is engaged in. When we are talking about robot, and if someone gives her a robot, I'm not sure about that. So building human-like robot amplify anthropomorphism. The motivation for humanoids, for human-like robots, are the following, in my view. To help model understand human features, to perform tasks in human environment, either to meet functional requirement or to facilitate social interactions. I am perfectly at ease with this first line. What Jean-Paul referred to in choreography and dancing fits in here. This is perfectly reasonable and fine. But the robots that we design here are supposed to stay in the lab. We are not putting them outside. I know that the borderline is not that easy, but we should be cautious. They are not supposed to be deployed everywhere. Let's discuss these last two motivations. This one, again, I fully agree. But let's discuss this last motivation, to meet functional requirement. Why not having this kind of robots in the human environment? Why wouldn't it be less effective? Are you aware of any study that says that this robot or that one can be less effective than a human-looking robot? I'm not aware of one. If you know one, please give me the study. I'll be happy to read it. They can be as effective. This one probably is more stable than me. Or that one, by the way, or this one may have more functionalities. Even a proponent of humanoids, Brian Duffy said, for functional requirements, efficient design would most likely require the physical form of the robot to constitute something completely different from the human form. So this motivation for me doesn't hold. The second motivation, this is a serious one, facilitate social interaction. Because of some minimal simplistic use, you can evoke competences in the viewer, in the user, well beyond the machine capabilities. And the easy thing is to rely on these cues. And robotics research focus on building humanoid, not because a humanoid is the most efficient design for any given task, but rather because of one's tendency and need to anthropomorphize. Okay? I have, and probably you also have read this argument many and many times, but then the same Brian Duffy adds, and then the robot looks back at you. This is in Jean-Paul's video. This adds a further dimension to the interaction. Maybe this is what we mean by a perceived notion of consciousness, artificially attained through anthropomorphism. Here, I cannot accept that, because we are cheating with the viewer, because the machine has no consciousness. Because if I say a perceived notion of consciousness, I'm using these simplistic cues in order to provoke something that's not there. And this is something that I think is on the border of designing deceptive, manipulative, and risky development. And at this point, I reach my conclusion, which says that wording robotics is not necessarily the term I'm more at ease with. I would prefer describing, or even better, modeling robotics, because model is distinct from the reality, and we keep some distance from that. And in doing so, we need to build some mapping from human sensory motor space to the robot sensory motor space. This is a very difficult but very important issue. For example, if you do learning from demonstration, you have to solve this mapping. It's a very essential thing. If you have to teach a robot how to do things, the robot has to do this mapping in order to understand what you do in your sensory motor space and how it can be mapped. I'm confident that we will be progressing on this and we'll be able to solve that. But we also have to build an analogy between the human mental space and the robot computational space. And this is much, much harder. I prefer to stick only to what I consider the safe ground, because anything that refers to grasping, moving, and so on is here. Anything that refers to a mental state is here, and I will not go there, because it's not something on which we have firm grounds for the moment. So my recommendation to myself, stick to the safe ground. There is less risk of being misleading or deceptive to the audience and to oneself. Make your assumptions explicit. If I am a believer of computationalism, I should wear a t-shirt say, computationalist believer. Please beware. Here are my assumptions. Up. What happened to... It's okay. Yes, I have to keep repeating to myself to exert extreme vigilance with metaphors. Do not rely on, if I am designing human-robot interactions, I should not rely on simplistic cues and facilities brought by anthropomorphism. I should dig further into this mapping between the sensory motoric spaces of the human and the robot in order to do these interactions, and possibly to have some computational model of how a human may react. And focus on our humanoid research agenda, in particular with respect to what I said for the motivation. And there is an urgency to reach a good social understanding. These are the 2 points that I underlined in the introduction, that in addition to outreach action, we need to integrate the concerns that some of us share in our designs and research agenda. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Malik. Pascal.
What do you think about the question of democracy about language? Because you say, I cannot accept that about metaphor. You cannot accept that, but it's common language. And is it used in a site that people cannot hold with metaphor? The French Academy didn't decide. In fact, nobody maybe decide. It's a question of democracy and the use of language, no?
I have all due respect to democracy. There is no problem of using the quark charm in a democratic way. It is harmless, as I mentioned. If you use the consensuousness of a machine and say the machine is sentient and conscious, you have, out of respect to society, explain what it means. what is the meaning that you are using? I'm not talking about you. If a roboticist speaks about emotion, of course everyone can use the word. But if you are a scientist, you have to ground your words in something that is not dangerous. And of course, everyone can use every word you are at ease with, but you have to clarify it with some. If you are a scientist and developing something that may affect society and the public, you have to give it some precise meaning.
If I may complete because I have similar question about that.
Yeah.
Your talk, in fact, was dedicated to roboticists, to the responsibility
of course,
of the roboticists.
This is what I said from the beginning.
But
because these are advice for myself.
Yeah. But the question is that you know that you will face some terminology by a large audience that use the metaphor, because this is the best way for them to understand the technology, because they have no access to the technology you are developing. They are not understanding that they should use the metaphor to discuss with you.
Again, Jean-Paul, I'm not saying that we should ban every metaphor. Metaphors are very useful for pedagogical reasons. I wrote it and so on. What I said is we should be extreme caution. And we should be cautious. A gene is not selfish. If you say a selfish gene, you have to write a book and explain what's there. And this is what Dawkins say. If we say an emotional robot, the robot has no emotion, and we have to explain in what sense. And why should I use this word to say it understands, whereas it does not understand? It's just giving a useful name to a procedure, and I am misleading people.
Just a word in the sense of this discussion.
Yeah.
It's at the core of Céline's work, and I think that we have to distinguish two different levels. The first one is that I think that everybody use these metaphors, even you, the roboticist.
Yeah.
And your responsibility is to make clear to the public what are the status of these figures, of this metaphor, but not to try you to avoid to use them, because you indeed use them, I think. Or am I wrong?
As I try to underline, the metaphors in this first line are in a way easy to clarify. They are not that easy, but they are easier to clarify. The metaphors in this second line are much harder, and we should not just use them like that and throw them in the air without being extremely cautious. This is what I'm saying. There is a huge difference between this and that. Because I have a good understanding of this, we can get a pretty good understanding of that, and we can try to build our metaphors in some precise sense that is not misleading. For this second line, this is not the case. The metaphors that I referred to, in my opinion, are misleading. When you use a metaphor of emotion, I'm sorry, I couldn't find any precise analogy, in the sense that I defined analogy between my definition of emotion and what the robot is doing.
According to some linguists and philosophers, the difference between analogy and metaphor is not so easy at all.
I offered my difference. Analogy has some rational ground in terms of the comparison between the commonalities and the differences, whereas metaphors is just evocative.
Yes, I don't think that the responsibility is only on the shoulders of the roboticists.
I agree.
Yeah, because I think that the problem is that the public expect from the robot to have emotion. They expect them to have, feelings, and you can do and say whatever you want. You can't change that. Whatever metaphors, analogy, or whatever you want. They want that.
Yeah. I agree. I fully agree with you. The dancing robots on the stage, people are looking to be entertained, but everyone on the stage is expecting something that is fake, that's not real. I'm fine with that. But when you get out of the stage, it's another story, and you better be careful.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one, is it not the case that at some point, because of people like Damiazo and this sort of people, it becomes some sort of a common idea among people like roboticists to think we can't study something which we can call anything which can be called intelligent without integrating emotion. So when you arrive at this point, the logical answer would be to stop speaking not only of emotion, but also of intelligence for describing robotic thing. And there is my second question, is it not the case either that either in philosophy of language, in mathematics with Bourbaki, in philosophy of language with Carnap, all these people, it has been many call to be systematic in language, and every time it has been done, it has been considered as a failure later on from a scientific point of view. It's two different questions. So why do you speak of intelligence? You know, do you accept intelligence as a term in robotics? And what is it real fecundity in being too strict? Even if after you have to be strict once,
Let me answer the your second question. Both are very interesting. Let me answer the second one first. The failures in mathematics you are referring to that I am aware of relates to formal means of arriving to results, of demonstrating things. It's the strictness that failed is related to the fact that you cannot encompass any significantly general theory in some formal way mechanically. This is one thing. My understanding. The failure in mathematics that I'm aware of are this one.
Sorry, but people at Bourbaki always explained that it was the wrong manner of understanding them, that they were very much for creativity, but what they try to do is just to make clear, to be more clear.
Okay.
But they refuse to say we don't.
You have in mind more the epistemological argument. I had in mind the formal argument. Now regarding intelligence. I think that we have been using the word AI. For me, AI, I don't even split it for so long that it doesn't bother me. The machine is exhibiting some form of skills in performing tasks. The robots that we are designing are meant to design tasks. And if I'm doing these same tasks, I may call myself as performing an intelligence skill. So this is some loosey way of referring to what I'm more comfortable with is a machine that is performing tasks with some level of skills and efficiency. Here,
grasping a bottle is not an intelligent behavior.
No,
and
but
for us it is.
No, but driving, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But driving a car in a crowded environment is not that easy. Or landing an airplane. Or I can refer to there were missions to space. The NASA. What was the exploration mission with very advanced planning techniques. Really, this kind of skills refer to intelligence in human.
Yeah.
Very briefly, I just wanted to say I enjoyed the talk greatly, but I also want to kind of put the bad news out so that everybody in the room knows it.
Yeah.
When we talk about computationalism and the idea that you can, for instance, create consciousness from with these robots and the idea that it's nonsense, I want to be clear that a large a number of researchers that are colleagues of mine honestly believe that the computers are going to get faster and they're going to have real consciousness, real emotion, all of that.
Yeah.
And they even believe they're going to download their consciousnesses into these robots.
Yeah.
So just understand, the world which we live in is one in which we have significant numbers of people with PhDs in the field who truly believe we're going to have consciousness, and we have to decide how to do wording in that milieu. Second thing is, same thing with authenticity. We can spend all day saying we don't want inauthentic, emotional, affective expression from robots to humans. But Hollywood and all the aspects of the entertainment industry have done a fantastic job at demonstrating to people how, even with minimal amounts of affect, they can create beautiful emotional responses in people. The thin edge of the wedge is already in, and it will only get pushed further. So again, we live in a society, in a milieu where that's going to happen, and it begs this question: how do we respond to that?
Yeah, I fully agree. And for the first point, unfortunately, scientists should be careful about their assumption and always keep their assumption in the front row. And the computationalism assumption, even if one is a believer in that, the assumption is never made explicit. This is what I'm critical about. And Hollywood, well, as far as this is a stage, I'm fine. It's just for entertainment. Now, if it's something else, we should be careful.
Okay, last comment or question?
Yes. Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. I agree with you in very many ways, and my background is cognitive psychology, and I work in robotics with roboticists, and I get very, very angry when I hear that there are robots with empathy, and that the robots empathize with us, so we're completely on the same page here. And I think this very often comes from the fact that there are many concepts important from psychology to robotics without proper scrutiny. So I agree with you. Okay. Now, the second part is you mentioned that you're fine with robots that are to perform certain tasks, and they're designed to perform certain tasks. Now, what if the task is to be a social robot? So the task is social. And what if that means that this robot is supposed to evoke in a human a social reaction? And what if that social reaction requires from the human to attribute certain mental states? Because maybe we humans can be social with other agents, even artificial agents, only if we sort of believe in a very naive way that, you know, there is some intentionality behind this behavior, because otherwise we won't be, I mean, I'm not going to be social with my coffee machine, right? Because I know that there's absolutely no intentionality. I probably won't be able to be social with a car, but with a robot that I think, oh, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's sad, in a sort of naive way, as much as I'm maybe as a kid with a teddy bear. But I think that maybe if we want to have social robots for social tasks, then maybe the question remains open.
Yes, maybe the question is open, but the kind of social work that I have in mind, for example, I am a carpenter and I have a co-worker helping me, or I am on some assembly line in an airplane and I have a co-worker helping me. If this is a machine, I don't need to attribute to it mental states. I need to fully understand how it behaves, what kind of help I can get of it, what kind of relationship and sharing of the work. And if I'm not a carpenter or worker in an assembly line and the robot is in my home and doing some whatever, cooking and so on, I would say I would expect the same thing. That is, understand how it works, what I can expect from it, and leave it at that. No intention, no emotion. I'm not expecting any emotion from a machine. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, old-fashioned, but this is my answer to your point.
Let's retire. Okay. Thank you so much again, Malik.
Sure.